Hello, everyone. It is June 25th, and I want to talk about guns. So, in recent weeks, months, years, there's been an increasing frequency of mass shootings, and so it's on the minds of everyone. What are we going to do about it? And it's getting really, really crazy. In the latest incident in Uvalde, Texas, the cops didn't even do anything about it, which was insane. They waited an hour before getting into the classrooms to confront and ultimately um, kill the shooter. So there's always this conflict between the conservatives and liberals on the question of guns. The liberals believe that they should be regulated and controlled and suppressed, and the conservatives strongly invoke the Second Amendment, and they claim a right to own a gun. And, and ultimately, every time there is a mass shooting, they talk about it, and eventually nothing happens because of this impasse that we have um, reached in our national politics. So, I want to address several questions here. Number one is whether gun ownership and use is protected by the Second Amendment. Secondly, what is the motive of these mass shootings? It's never talked about in the media, and I think it's an important question, and I'll go on into it as I proceed. Um, another question, what else did I want to, yeah, another question that I wanted to address is in what cases gun ownership could be useful, in what cases are they not useful, and how we can regulate it much better than we currently do. Okay? So let's start with the first question, the Second Amendment. So everyone believes and everyone maintains that there's a Second Amendment right. Even the liberals, they don't like it, but they concede that there is a right, according to the Constitution, for the people to bear arms. That's literally what the Second Amendment says. A militia being necessary for the security of the free states, the rights of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. That's more or less how the Second Amendment reads. As I say, hey, the people have a right to bear arms. So that's it. It's in the Constitution. The big problem with this reading is that the preface to the sentence clearly states that this is about a militia. It's not about individuals. When it says the people to bear arms, it's not talking about persons, it's not talking about individuals, it's talking about people, and the reason they need to bear arms is for the security of the free states, meaning it's for state security, not personal security, but for the security of the state government. And so I still don't get it. To this day, I don't understand how scholars, people who have researched this, and people, the people in the Supreme Court, people at law schools, politicians who know better, how do they pretend to believe? I mean, either they're idiots, or they're fools, or they're evil, because that's not what the Constitution is saying. But then again, we had Roe v. Wade, which was, by the way, overturned today, make it yesterday. It is June 25th right now. So yeah, I mean, if Roe v. Wade could happen, then certainly people could misinterpret the Constitution into believing that there is some sort of right there is that plainly isn't there. But like I said, it just isn't there. So clearly, an individual does not have a right to bear arms. So let's dispense with this before we proceed. Now, having said this, it doesn't mean that I'm against gun ownership and gun possession. I'm just saying it's not in the Constitution, okay? So just disabuse yourself from this notion that you are protected. If you're a conservative, if you're a hillbilly, if you live in a rural area and you hunt and you do this and that, whatever, hey, I'm all for it. But it's not in the Constitution. You don't have a constitutional right, okay? Now, you better petition your legislature to regulate it in a manner that would befit you, that would permit you to carry on with your lifestyle that involves gun ownership, because it's not protected at the federal level. Now, should it not be regulated at all? Absolutely not. Um, what comes to mind, of course, is the prescription drugs. Like, we all understand that prescription drugs should be regulated. Um, it's not controversial at all. Everyone knows that if you want a drug that has the potential for harming you, if you want it, and if you need it medically, then if a doctor prescribes it, you can get it. If your doctor does not prescribe it, you shouldn't be able to get it. Why? Because you have no need for it, and it could potentially harm you and other people. So this is a pretty conventionally agreed upon standard in society. And so with guns, it could not only hurt yourself, it could impose harm on other people. So as a libertarian, that's far more, like, relative to each other. This is far more urgent to regulate than prescription drugs, because with prescription drugs I can only harm myself. Again, libertarian. I have the liberty to control my own body and my own outcome, and yet we choose to regulate it. So with guns, all the more we should regulate it, because not only do I have the potential for harming myself, but I can harm other people in the process. And so I see no reason why this shouldn't be regulated in a very similar manner to prescription drugs. So how so? Well, very simple. So you come in, you say to the doctor, in this case it wouldn't be a doctor, it would be basically the gun dealer, right? You say to the gun dealer, I want to buy a gun. So the gun dealer would ask you, and again, it doesn't mean the gun dealer himself. He could outsource it to a third party, to a private organization, or to the state. But whatever party is executing the investigation / vetting, they would ask you, okay, what do you need it for? And you would state a reason. Again, the same way that drugs work. If you want a particular drug, you can't just go to the drugstore and get it. You have to state a reason first. Okay, there has to be a reason for you. So you would say, hey, I need it for hunting. Okay, I live in rural Iowa and I hunt. Okay. No, is it plausible? Does it make sense? Is this guy telling something? Does this story add up? Does it make sense? He doesn't live in Brooklyn, right? He's not hunting in Brooklyn, right? So yeah, he lives in an area where hunting is commonplace. That's his lifestyle. He needs it. Okay, let's look at his background. And if he needs a pistol for self-defense, same thing. Why do you need it for self-defense? And it doesn't have to be an extensive vetting, but you should have, at the very minimum, you should have a stated reason. Secondly, you look at what we need to do is we need to come up with a profile. This profile can have a whole bunch of points, like profile points, characteristics of what is this person? Is it male or female? Is this person, what's their age? 17, 18, 20, what's their level of education that they've completed? What's the type of job that they do, and how much do they earn? Do they have a lot of friends? Do they have a family? All of these things, they might seem random, and a lot of people would tend to believe, oh, it's discriminatory to state, oh, this person is more apt to abuse guns than the other. But I would maintain that this is the only way we can get a handle on the situation, because if you want to be non-discriminatory, non-discrimination is causing huge harm in society, and this is part of it, in fact, because we don't want to acknowledge that a certain profile is far more likely to commit mass shootings than another. Okay, if you have a 45-year-old who lives in an expensive house, he has had threats. I mean, not just in a house. So he owns a lot of property, an influential person, rich person. Some people wish him harm, and he's married, he has children, he has assets, he has aspirations, he's going somewhere. There are threats to his life. A person like that who wants to own a gun, well, it's far, far more likely to be legit than an 18-year-old straight out of high school, broke up with his girlfriend, doesn't have anything, doesn't have a penny to their name, doesn't get along with his family, gets into a fight with everyone, comes from divorced parents, lives in a trailer park, all of these things, they're all bad. They're all conducive to the kinds of things that we see happening in mass shootings. And so we have to do this. And unfortunately, right now, my understanding is that the only metrics that they use to determine whether you pass or fail a background check is criminality. They look at your background. They look at your criminal background and they see, oh, this person has not committed a crime. And this is just silly, really silly. Because, a lot of the mass shootings we see recently are people who are clearly up to no good, but they're too young to have committed a crime, right? They're just 18 years old, like the Uvalde shooter. And so this is not a good indicator. By the time they commit the crime, they've already killed 100 people. So, I mean, what's the point? It doesn't work. You have to come up with a method of determining the likelihood that this profile would commit a heinous act of murder. Which brings me to the final point, which is that the abuse of guns, 99% of the people who die and the magnitude and the destruction that is being caused by the abuse of guns, by abuse meaning using it improperly, namely committing a crime with it, killing someone, injuring someone, etc. My understanding is, I'm willing to conjecture here that almost all of it is not one-on-one violence. It's not someone who, I want to take revenge on, I don't know, on my ex-wife. Most of the biggest harm that guns are causing is by mass shooters, in my opinion. And maybe this is an opinion rather than a fact. But I definitely maintain that it's a lot. It's magnitudes. Magnitudes? What am I saying? It's orders of magnitude. That's what I wanted to say. Orders of magnitude a lot worse for someone to randomly shoot people up in a theater or a school than for someone to have a very targeted approach. Hey, this is the person who has wronged me, and I want him or her dead. Okay, so why? Obviously, the obvious reason, because in the first case, when you're shooting up a theater, these people are 1,000,000% innocent, right? They have nothing, and there's no way that they could have foreseen it coming, or that they could have escaped the shooting, or bargained with you. They never had a chance, right? It's like taking a pot shot. Whereas in the second case, there's a fight between two people. Now, it's not justified to kill them, but the victim sees it coming, and it's one person. It's targeted. You can negotiate. Anyway, the point being here is that that this investigation that I'm recommending here is not driven by already committed criminality, but the likelihood of committing mass shootings. Because if you can eliminate those who are likely to commit mass shootings, if we can tamp down that phenomenon, we will have mostly solved this problem. Again, there will still be some illegal and improper killings out there, but it will be much, much less, and it certainly would cause much, much less damage on society at large. Okay? Which brings me to the last point that I want to bring up, which is the motive. So I find it very striking and very bizarre that the media, whenever they discuss mass shootings, they'll give you all the gory details as to exactly what happened, when, where, what they did and how many people died and etc. Blah 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 blah. But they will not tell you the elephant in the room, which is why. The Uvalde shooting is the most recent one, the one in Texas. Nobody. I looked up many articles on this, and nobody even ventures to try to solve this riddle as to why he did it. They don't say. They don't even try to determine. No attempt is even being made. So I puzzled over this for a while. I think that part of the reason why they don't do it is because in criminal law, there is a certain rule that says that the prosecution does not have to prove motive. And a lot of times when we deal with crimes, we tend to deal with them through the eyes of the prosecution, because the prosecution is usually the one responsible for solving crimes and bringing people to justice. And so the media tend to report it from the prism of the prosecution. And if the prosecution is not interested in discussing motive, they don't discuss it either. But this is a big mistake. Why? Because I'm going to tell you why. The reason that the prosecution doesn't have to prove motive is that motive is very difficult to prove. And because the way our law is designed, namely that it is the onus is on the prosecution to prove that you're guilty rather than on the defendant to prove that they're innocent, right? So therefore, our law is designed to minimize the elements that the prosecution has to prove, because they're already so burdened by the fact that they have to prove that a certain fact has occurred. They have to prove that this event occurred. They have to prove intent. They have to prove what else? There's all kinds of other points that they have to prove. And so for us to say that they have to prove motive too, that they had a bad motive, right? How do they know what the motive is? So even though in truth, a bad motive is a lot worse than a neutral or good motive, we don't want to add this to the burden of the prosecution because it's difficult to prove. And on top of that, it's unnecessary, because if you committed a bad act, the why is not important. If you murder someone, you should never kill someone unless it's in self-defense, they say, right? So whatever motive you have, this person might have insulted you and done all kinds of emotional abuse against you. But if they didn't threaten your life right then and there to kill you, you shouldn't kill them. That's what the prosecution is going to argue. So they don't care about the motive. And they're still going to prosecute you. But it's wrong. Because like I said, this is a technicality of the law that you don't have to prove motive. In terms of organizing our society, it makes a very big difference in terms of why someone does something. Because if we have a certain phenomenon, a lot of people are committing a certain crime, then evidently there is something going on in society, a certain cultural phenomenon that induces people to do so. And so instead of just focusing on individual, hey, we don't care about their motivation, all we know is that they committed X, Y, and Z, and therefore they're guilty, then you're kind of missing the bigger picture, and you're missing the chance of reorganizing your society as to eliminate that, whatever that motive might be in our culture. Okay? So, a prime example would be, let's say, violence on TV, right? So you might prosecute all the criminals and all the gangs and all the killers, but if it is true, I'm not saying it's true, but if it's true that they learn that violence from TV and you're not addressing the TV problem, then, is this really a good way of going about organizing our resources as a society? Because it's quite resource heavy to prosecute someone, to incarcerate them, to kill them. At the end of the day, all we want is justice. All we want is to prevent people from doing harm, right? So why don't you take a step back and look at the bigger picture and address the root cause of the issue, address the motive, rather than just going on the incarceration and the punitive aspect of it, the retributive aspect of justice. Um, why don't we, especially as politicians, not necessarily as a prosecutor who is focused on the individual and is focused on retributive justice, but as a politician and as people who devise the culture in our society, we should look after motive. And so the question should be, why are people committing mass shootings? And I don't want to go into too many details. I have some theories on this. But what I would say is, though, that this is something that did not happen 100 years ago. It's a recent thing, and it's getting worse. And so we have to ask ourselves what in our culture has changed. I can give you a few clues. A lot of the people who are doing this are suicidal, really. And that what they're doing really is they're saying to themselves, hey, if I'm going to go out, if my life is useless, I'm going to make as many other lives useless as I can. Why not? If I'm suffering already and I'm going to die and it's worth for me to die, why don't I take out others with me? Why don't I have them suffer too? And it seems like a pretty reasonable assumption to make. You know, if you're going to blow it up, blow it all up, right? What difference does it make to you? I'm going to die anyway. And this kind of utter disregard for human life happens mostly when people don't regard their lives either. And so, like I said, this is something that did not happen in the past. And so we need to ask ourselves, why are there so many people who are suicidal? So obviously, this is a very long question to ask. I have answers, but I don't want to go into it. I've been talking for 22 minutes already. The point I'm really making here is this is not addressed at all. Very disturbing to me. No politicians bring it up. The media never bring it up. Again, they don't focus on, they never put the spotlight on individuals who commit mass shootings as to what their motive is. And they also don't do it as a genre, as a general question as to why people are doing it in general. Why the increase? You know, what are the societal changes that are contributing to this? And so I think that that's really the most important thing in preventing mass shootings is not gun control per se, but rather addressing the motive. So like I said, that's number one, addressing the motive. Number two, we should have common sense regulation, and again, it should not be criminal driven, but rather it should be profile driven, like I explained earlier. And the third thing I mentioned is that, I'm actually going in reverse order right now. The other thing I mentioned is that it is not protected by the Second Amendment. Absolutely not. It's not protected by the Second Amendment. It's sensible for a person who needs it to have that right and that ability to carry a weapon with them for self-defense or for hunting. But there is no reason why a state shouldn't ask people, why the state government should not ask people to justify it. Again, like prescription drugs, you can't get prescription drugs. There's no right. There's no constitutional right. There's no liberty right. In terms of liberty, even though I'm a libertarian, my will and my libertarian sensibilities are being overruled here. And so, yeah. So long.